Welcome to the GMAT strategy. You're here because you believe there's a better way to study for the GMAT, and so do we. We created the GMAT strategy to maximize your results and minimize your effort so you can get to the fun parts about business school and life as quickly as possible. My name is Isaac Puglia, and I've been teaching GMAT classes and tutoring privately for the GMAT for over a decade, and I've helped tens of thousands of students get into the business schools of their choice. I'm excited to be a part of your MBA journey because we all at TGS believe that the world can benefit from the best possible business leaders that we can find. If this show is bringing you value, please share it with your friends and family who are studying so that together we can make this process as easy and as painless as it can possibly be. Let's go. Today, I'm excited to talk to you about the GMAT Quant section, and I want to make sure everybody has the baseline information that's critical in 2024 and beyond now that the Quant section is basically brand new and different for the GMAT Focus Edition, which is the GMAT going forward. So let's start with the format of the Quant section. You're going to see 21 questions in 45 minutes. This is slightly more than 2 minutes per question, which is a nice bump up from past exams. For example, the previous iteration of the GMAT was 31 questions in 62 minutes, so exactly 2 minutes per question. This is now a nice little bit of a buffer. It's not a huge change, but we'll take what we can get when it comes to having enough time to complete these questions properly. Now, on the old version of the GMAT, there were two types of questions in the quant section. One was called problem solving, and the other was called data sufficiency. Problem solving is the standard 5-option multiple choice question format that many of you are going to be used to from standardized tests you've taken in the past. Data sufficiency is a brand new type of question, and I'm not going to cover that in depth here because it's not in the quant section anymore. Now, on GMAT Focus, the way the GMAT is now going forward, there are only problem-solving questions in the quant section. So when we say quantitative section going forward, we mean just problem-solving questions, which is some text or an equation or a question at the top of the screen, and then 5-option multiple choice that you pick one answer every single time. There's no multiple option type questions on GMAT Quant. That's a big departure. If you've been studying for the previous exam, data sufficiency is still on the GMAT Focus Edition, but it's in a different section now, which is called Data Insights, and I'll have an episode all about the Data Insights section coming out in the next couple weeks. But for now, we're going to focus on Quant. So what is the material that is tested? It's basically quantitative or math content through about high school level geometry. Now, GMAT, the people who write the exam, have been very vocal about the fact that there's no geometry on the new version of the GMAT. But like I've said in the past, I haven't found that to be 100% true. It's like 85% true. So there isn't any heavy geometry computation like there used to be on past iterations of the GMAT. And let me be specific for you. So heavy geometric computation would be like you are presented with a 5-sided figure that you then need to break down into a bunch of 30, 60, 90-degree angle triangles. And then you need to calculate a side length of the overall figure based on those triangles. Like that's pretty heavy duty geometry computation. And I haven't seen any of that on the new exam, and nobody else within TGS has either. Having said that, we have seen some surface level geometry content where you're tested on basic knowledge of the coordinate plane or basic shapes like spheres and cubes. They assume that you know what a cube is or a rectangular box is, and they might even assume that you know how to calculate the volume of a rectangular box, which, if it's been a while since you studied this, is length times width times height. So to me, that's not no geometry. That's still geometry content. We're still having our students go through some surface level geometry content, memorizing all the basic formulas, and I recommend that you do the same, irrespective of what your current provider is telling you about geometry on the exam. It is there, but it's not super in depth in terms of like having to do a lot of geometric manipulation, and that's the best, most clear I can be right now based on our current level of data, because the new exam has only been live officially for a couple months now, and we're doing our best to stay on top of it. But I promise everything that I've told you so far and everything I'm about to tell you in this episode is validated with at least 10 data points. And we will only increase that data set going forward. I want you to know this is stuff I'm sharing with you that you can bank on, and I'm not speculating here. And if there's anything speculative, I will let you know about that. But I'm just being real with you, like that's what we know so far. And that's what I recommend in terms of geometry. So what exactly do I mean with quant content through high school level geometry? So if you go backward from how you probably learned math from geometry toward the past, you'll see things like algebra, manipulating equations and expressions. you'll see things like exponent math and square root math, manipulating complicated exponents, negative exponents, that kind of thing. You'll see a lot of arithmetic, especially with decimals and fractions, and there's no calculator on the exam. Or sorry, there's no calculator on the quant section. There is a calculator in the data insights section. We'll get to that in the data insights episode. So if you wished for a calculator in the past on data sufficiency questions, now your wish is come true, but no calculator on problem solving questions in the quant section itself. So you will be asked to do some arithmetic operations, usually by hand. So this generally necessitates relearning long subtraction, long division, etc. It's all stuff you've known in the past, stuff you can shake the rust off of. Maybe you never had great quant education. This is a good opportunity to do it right and get a better teacher and a better support now that you have a little more control over that as an adult. Also, other concepts, basic counting and sequences. Nothing super advanced like crazy sums of sequences or limits like you might have learned in calculus. It doesn't go that far, but you might be asked to find a pattern in a sequence of numbers that allows you to find the sum of the first 100 terms of that sequence. And there are nice little tricks of the trade that you'll learn as you go through your courses of study that will help you with that. I'm just listing out the main greatest hits of stuff that you're going to see on the exam so that you're well prepared when you get into studying. Basic functions, same idea that I was just talking about with sequences. You are expected to have a deep knowledge of what a function is. So this would be something like f of x equals y plus 10. You're expected to know what that means and be able to do manipulations based on the basics. But there's not going to be any super complicated graphing or derivatives or anything like calculus or trigonometry or what is sometimes in the United States called algebra 2. There's no radians, there's no tan, cosine, none of that. It's just stuff that you learned probably before that. Last but certainly not least, basic word problems. Translating word problems into algebra and especially percents, word problems involving percent calculations. That's something I've seen that is heavily represented on the new GMAT quant section. That has always been a big fixture of the exam, but because there were 31 questions in the previous iteration of the quant section and now there's only 21, I've seen about the same number of percent word problems as there were on the previous exam, which means they are a much bigger percentage of the section now. And so if you are not particularly great at percent word problems, that's definitely a place that you're going to want to focus energy at improving. This is the thing I've seen the most of, honestly. But that's pretty much it. The content itself is not particularly advanced. It's more about the style of questions and the way that they ask the question that can make the exam difficult. And so I've got some recommendations for you in terms of how to study the basic content and then also how to study how it's going to show up on the exam to give you an advantage that you otherwise wouldn't have. So what do I mean by the style of question? Well, technically the section is called quantitative reasoning. And we just call it the quant section for short, but I guess, maybe should call it the quantitative reasoning section. So let's think about what's the difference between just doing math and quantitative reasoning. Well, if we were going to really break it down, quantitative reasoning is almost more like logic problems that involve math than heavy computation type questions. And I think that is not the perfect description of what happens in the math section, but it's close enough for you to get the idea of what you're going to be up against. And you're going to see a lot of tricks. You might have already seen this in your prep where you're like, wait a minute, I totally knew the exponent content involved in this question and I still got it wrong because it was asked in a tricky way or a confusing way. That's a lot of what you're going to be up against in the GMAT quant section. So if your mind works that way, like you're very puzzle oriented, you might really like the quant section, might be a natural strength for you. If your mind doesn't work that way, don't worry, it's totally fine to have a more traditional approach. Many different providers out there teach that more traditional, like linear approach to solving questions, and they kind of treat every quantitative reasoning question as just a math problem, which is fine. You can have success with both styles, and for some of you, you're going to favor one style in certain situations and another style in other situations, and that's fine. There's a lot of great providers out there who can help you. If you want some recommendations, then go back a few weeks to my episode on how to start your GMAT studies in 2024, and I'll walk you through a full list of providers, how long each one's going to take, approximate budget for each one, and then I give some recommendations on what I think you should do if you're genuinely unsure and just like lost in the marketplace, which is super, super common these days because there's just so much noise out there, and I'm doing my best, and all of us behind the scenes at TGS are doing our best to bring clarity to the marketplace. So please give us feedback and let us know if we are fulfilling on that intention for you and making this easier for you. You can reach out to us via DM on pretty much any social channel these days, or you can comment on any of our posts if you prefer that. So that's the basic rundown of what is on the quant section, if that makes sense. And that was the first question I wanted to answer for you, which is like, what is the section? 21 questions in 45 minutes, and what is on it? Couple extra tips. I already talked about how there's no calculator. So what does that mean? It means that hand computation is extremely important. Many people out there are going to tell you you should work on your mental math skills. And I've personally found, after working with tens of thousands of students across many, many, many years of doing this, that that is a terrible idea for 99.9% of people. If someone is telling you to do a lot of math in your head, that is wrong, in my opinion. And it's extremely risky. And usually, what they're telling you when they're telling you that is they're just telling you the way that they personally like to take the test, which is different than the best way for you personally to take the test. And that's because a lot of GMAT instructors are just super smart and super great at standardized tests. And this is what they naturally happen to be good at. And so they're not in the industry because they have some big mission of impacting the world. They're in the industry because they're lazy and they're not good at anything else. And this is just like a place where they can make money. And I'm not here to judge whether that's good, bad, whether it should be or not that way. Like it's this is free market capitalism. This is the way the system has been designed, and we're not really here to debate the merits or the morality of that at all. I'm here to teach you how to be great at the GMAT and just share with you my observations. And if you disagree or you're upset by my opinion, like I totally understand that. And like I'm open to your feedback. Like I said, you're welcome to challenge my ideas at any point. I'm just sharing with you what I've seen works best for the largest number of people, which I think is my role when it comes to making public content. So just, little disclaimer there. But if you're the mental math person and you have great results with mental math, great. I'm never going to argue with your results. I am 100% a pragmatist. If you're getting the results you want doing all the math in your head, don't stop. Keep going, man. I'm telling you that a lot of people are going to tell you to do mental math because it's easy for them to do mental math. And for you personally, just statistically, in terms of like the audience who I know is consuming this content, that is probably not you. You're probably not the mental math person. And it's going to be a huge waste of time to try to get great at mental math because it's going to lead to you making a lot of mistakes on questions that you could have gotten right if you just got better at hand computation and got faster at writing out all the math. And I know it's painful. I still have the voice in my head when I'm doing the quant section saying like, you don't have time to write all this stuff down. Hurry up. We're out of time. And there's significant time pressure in the section for most people. And so I just want you to know that's a totally normal experience. And it's going to be a bit of an internal battle for most of us to continue to write down the things that we need to write down and cultivate good scratch work habits, even under the incredible time pressure that most of us face during the test. And I'll talk more about that and like how the scoring algorithm works and how you can adjust your strategy to make that a little bit easier as we go through the episode. But for now, you're going to hear me talk about hand computation a lot. And the reason for that is the thing that's going to drive your quant score more than anything else, everybody, is not missing questions you know how to do. Getting hard questions right is awesome, but that's not going to be the bread and butter of a top quant score on this exam. The bread and butter of a top quant score on this exam is going to be doing the basics really well. It's like most business situations. If you have incredible marketing and incredible ads, but a terrible product and terrible fulfillment, you don't really have a great business. Obviously, that's debatable, but like it's going to be a hard argument to make that great marketing and great ads make a great business. Okay. Obviously, it depends on your intention and who you're talking to. Whereas, if you have an incredible product with incredible word of mouth, incredible customer service, everybody who works with you loves you, you could have pretty bad marketing and your business is probably still going to grow because you have a solid foundation. You're doing the basics really, really well. So that's just an analogy. Again, we're not here to talk about business fundamentals, but it's an analogy most of you can probably relate to because you're all business people if you're here and considering getting an MBA. So that I think is a good analogy for how you want to be thinking about the quant section and your quant skills, which is nail the stuff you know, nail the basics really, really well and super consistently. That's what you want. A consistent process yields consistent results. And you really don't want to be that person who's sometimes getting the super killer quant score and then the next test is way lower and then the next test is high and then two in a row that are low. Like that's a good way to drive yourself nuts. And that's very similar to the like business that's purely based on slick advertising, where like sometimes when the ads are good, everybody's happy and you're bringing in sales. And then other months where your ads are bad, like you don't have any positive word of mouth. You probably have negative word of mouth working against you that you have to advertise against. And that's undercutting your performance. And that's how it's going to be if you don't have great, solid scratch work habits and you start missing questions that you did know how to do because of computation issues. So I really just want to take the opportunity to hammer that point because a lot of people have a lot of resistance to that and they don't want to cultivate good scratch work habits because it's boring and it just doesn't seem like the sexy, slick, cool shortcut approach that gets tons of views on YouTube. And so it just seems less important. It's like less exciting, if that makes sense. Um, but maybe to use a sports analogy, it's like no team ever won a championship on highlight reel plays only. Things like defense and not turning the ball over is what is the foundation of a championship team. Now it's great if you can have some highlight reel plays and some, killer, super cool content to like push to the internet to be like, oh my gosh, did you see this highlight? Like I love sports highlights. But let's not pretend that sports highlights getting super hard quant questions right and then missing a bunch of questions you know how to do is going to yield a great quant score because it's not. Okay. You'll get much better results in my experience just cultivating good scratch work habits from the beginning. I talked about this in a past episode, but I'll just reiterate it here. Make sure you're doing all your scratch work and your practice problems on a separate piece of paper because that's how you're going to do it on test day. The question's going to be on a computer screen and you're going to have to do all your figuring, whether you're taking the exam in person or at home, on a separate whiteboard or a separate scratch paper. And so you want to get used to doing that because transcription, copying down the problem from the computer screen, is super, super important to this. Not missing questions you know how to do philosophy that I'm going to really recommend for you. Okay. So, how do you relearn this basic content that I was talking about, and how do you start to develop these good habits that I'm recommending that you do? Usually, the best way to learn or relearn this is just a structured approach from books or courses. And like I said, I ran through the whole gamut of that in the How to Start episode from a few weeks ago. That can really help you out if you're not sure where you should be beginning with this process. Now, if you need a completely free program that's just focused on math basics, then you can check out Khan Academy. And I do reference some Khan Academy videos from, let's see, the 11th edition of the official guide from GMAT Review. And those are probably like 8 episodes back or so from this in our podcast stream. And I do not think those episodes are on YouTube yet, but I do have a playlist on our YouTube channel of me going through some official guide questions for you, and you can get a feel for my approach and what I recommend in terms of like scratch work and strategizing on individual specific questions. I've realized the pod isn't like the best format for that because it's quite visual. But if you want a link to Khan Academy, that is in the episodes. You can also just Google KAHN and Khan Academy should come up. Or GMAT Club. GMAT Club has some great free study plans that can help you structure your approach. And if you want a free study plan, I went through that last week, I think, 2 weeks ago in the How to Structure Your Study Time episode. Okay, so all of this is freely available. And if you want some help and you want me to walk you through it step by step, then go back to the How to Structure Your GMAT Study Time episode, and I'll be happy to walk you through that. If you want to just go straight to Google or GMAT Club, or you have a free plan that you like already, great. That's awesome. Having said all that, if you can invest some money into a paid program, that's usually going to help you out in terms of speed, usually. So that's the basics of what's on the quant section and what I recommend as you're starting out. Now, let's get into some higher level strategizing around what does this mean for business school? How should you be framing your study of the quant section versus the other sections? And how do you optimize your approach so that you can get the most efficient gains? So the individual quant score matters to admissions officers. They are going to look at your individual quant score when they're evaluating your candidacy for any business school, just like they're going to look at your overall score. So let's talk about that relationship. Right now, for top 10 programs, 78 quant or higher is great. And at that point, your quant score is generally high enough. If you're targeting top 3, I would say that up to 80, 81 helps. And then after that, it's nice to have a higher quant score than that, but it's probably not helping in terms of making your case that you're good at quant material. It'll help your overall score. So if you're having the easiest time driving your overall score, by increasing the quant, then great, go ahead and do it. But after 81, I think that's the point of diminishing returns. And if you could more easily increase your total score by improving your verbal or improving your data insight score, then I would recommend that. So let's talk about how that works. Quant drives the overall score, and a good way to simplify this for yourself is a 1 point gain on the quant section is going to drive the overall score by 10 points. So let's say my baseline test is a 75 quant and a 555 on the overall score. If I just moved my quant to 76 and didn't move my verbal or DI score at all, then my overall score would be a 565. Now, this isn't a perfect linear relationship, but it's close enough that as a student, you can use that to gauge what do you need to do to drive your overall score improvement. And that's also true of verbal and DI by and large. So like if I started with a 75 quant and a 555 overall, and my quant did not move, but I've moved my verbal from a 75 to a 77, let's say, then that's going to drive my score up to a 575, all else being equal. Okay, so you can use that to gauge how many points do I need to grow on each section in order to go from my starting score to my goal score, and which sections should I be focusing on? If my quant is 78 or higher already, I should probably be focusing my energy on verbal and DI and moving those, unless I personally feel that quant is the easier score for me to move, in which case I'll triple down on quant. So hopefully that makes sense in terms of how to optimize your study time and where to focus. If you have questions about that, because I know it's quite a technical topic and you're not sure how to handle your specific situation, again, just shoot us a DM and we'll be happy to help out. Next point to make about the quant section. This is really important. It is going to adapt to your ability in real time. So the GMAT is what's called a computer adaptive test. And just to break that down to the most basic elements, when you get a question right, the algorithm is going to serve you a harder question. When you get a question wrong, the algorithm is going to serve you an easier question. And it's going to use those question difficulties as you move through the section to calculate your score. So what does that mean? That means that your score is not strictly based on accuracy. And that's a really, really important point to hammer, because pretty much every test you've taken up until this point in your life has been based on accuracy, how often you're right and how infrequently you're wrong. And now all of a sudden you're playing a totally different game where the difficulty of questions matters and where in the section you get certain questions right and wrong matters. Like getting an easy level question wrong at the beginning might affect your score differently than getting an easy level question wrong at the end of the section. So what I am here to say is this is a little more complicated. In fact, a lot more complicated than a typical test and the typical way you would evaluate your performance. And so there's quite a bit of strategizing that goes into developing a really killer approach to the GMAT. And that's why we created TGS for you in the first place, to get as much of this information out to you for free as possible. And then if you want more extensive help, to develop the right ways of helping all of you out. And so far, the track record shows we're doing a good job with that. But again, if you disagree or you have feedback about how we can be better, please reach out anytime and we would love to hear from you. Honestly, even if your feedback is super negative and super brutal, like we want to hear it. We want to hear from all of you and we want to be the best that we can possibly be for you. We're here to serve. Because I'll speak for myself and many people within the TGS organization, but for me personally, I can speak to my story. I needed a lot of this help that I'm giving you right now back when I started, and I did not have it. And I struggled so much with this exam. I probably just burned 6 months of my life that I'm never getting back, studying hardcore, like 20 to 40 hours a week, on top of having a full-time job and personal responsibilities, et cetera. And, that was a really painful experience. And so I'm just trying to help you shortcut that by giving you the inside track. So yeah, if we're not doing a good enough job and you feel like there's stuff we could be doing better, please let us know. So back to business here. There's quite a bit of strategizing with this adaptive test. And in my experience, it doesn't work super well to talk about it in only audio format, like a podcast. And so I put together a video. It's on our website, and you can just go to the gmatstrategy.com. It's linked in the description of this pod. You can click there and watch the webinar, and I'll walk you through a lot more details about how the algorithm works and how you can develop your own strategy for dealing with it if you want to. And that is just going to be a much more efficient format for you to learn that information than me trying to talk you through that like audio only. It's not going to go over well. There has to be a video component because it's just such a foreign concept. It's so different than how you're used to thinking about your performance on a test. And I promise that's going to really help you out. So check that out when you have a moment. It's about 40 minutes long, and we get great feedback on it. But again, if you don't like it or you think it could be better, let us know. So again, I just want to hammer this point. Your performance in quant is not just about how many you got right and wrong. And that might be really, really, really confusing. You'll probably see posts on forums if you're out there on the interwebs of people like, hey, I got 3 questions wrong on this test and I got a lower score than the one that I got 6 questions wrong on. Like, what is the deal with that? And it just kind of is like a brain melter until you understand how the scoring algorithm works and what some of the basic assumptions are. And just be careful out there. There's a lot of disinformation about the algorithm because there's just a lot of people in the industry, like I was saying, who aren't dedicated to like working hard or providing the best information or product that they can. They kind of just want views, kind of like the hype beast approach. And I'm not here to judge. It's just not the way I like to do it personally. And if you've been following me for any length of time, I would hope that that's obvious that I'm about giving you like hardcore advice. And I'm not a genius. And I didn't just come out of the womb great at standardized tests. I had to work really hard on this stuff. A lot of lessons learned behind me. And here to share those with you. So just be careful. I'm not saying everybody who's teaching you stuff about the algorithm is bad. And I'm certainly not saying everybody in the industry is bad. You just want to be careful and just validate your sources, everybody. This is a really important thing with the internet these days and the ability to spread false or just slightly inaccurate information. And anyone can get on the internet and make a claim about how great they are. But to be able to back up that claim with real results, that's difficult. Okay. So make sure the people's claims that you're buying into or looking at are back upable. Is this just someone who's been studying for the GMAT for 3 weeks and is just repeating something they read on another forum that's totally wrong? Might be, might be. Is this a top professional who just looks like a top professional and they really have very few results to back up the fact that they say that they're a top professional or that they can help you? Or is this someone who's legit, who has thousands of successful case studies behind them to back up their claims? And many times they're not even making any claims. They're just telling you what they've observed. Okay. Just something to think about, everybody. Just trying to be a good friend to you here and help you avoid a lot of the mistakes that I made. So with the algorithm thing, just make sure that there's a compelling case and real data behind the claims of the person who's trying to teach you about the algorithm. Because like, I was on a forum the other day and there were a bunch of people in the comments debating about whether the new GMAT is adaptive at all, which is insane, everybody. Okay, that is absolute insanity. It is definitely adaptive. There is no question about that. Nobody is disagreeing with that. There are zero official sources that say that it is not adaptive, except a huge, huge misprint in the official guide for 2023 where they said the data insights section is not adaptive, but they later redacted that and they sent everybody who has an online account a message that says it is adaptive. But if you're thinking the whole GMAT is not adaptive, and these people were genuinely debating this in the comment section, I could not believe my eyes. So it's just an example of the disinformation that you might come across when you're out there just being like, oh, I should just look at some GMAT stuff now. And I don't recommend that casual attitude to studying. I recommend the hardcore, super serious mindset when it's study time. Make sure you're only learning from the highest quality sources you can get access to. And then if you're going to half study or just kind of like, oh, check out this YouTube video about the GMAT, don't do it. Don't even spend that time. It's better to spend that time totally chilling out, watching your favorite Netflix show or reading a book or doing whatever you want to do as a leisure activity than it is to be in that gray area of just absorbing data about the GMAT that's low quality. That's going to make your studies super inefficient. Okay. That's my advice. Up to you how you want to operationalize that. Okay. So the reason I'm bringing this up is this was a huge missing piece for me back in the day. I thought the test was just pure based on accuracy, and I just kept doing more and more and more and more and more and more practice questions, and my score kept going down, 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 down. And you can imagine how that felt. And I don't want that to be you. So I'm just trying to help you out. That is my intention here. And I apologize if I'm doing it in a way that doesn't resonate with you. That's not my intention. I'm not trying to put anybody down or call anybody out on not being a great provider. Just trying to be a good friend to you in this situation and give you the real from my perspective on what the industry is like and the stuff that you're going to confront as a student. So, a couple things about the algorithm that are worth noting and relevant to what I've already talked through with you here. Getting easy questions wrong is going to hurt your score more than getting hard questions wrong. And the reason I'm bringing that up is just to circle back briefly to what I was saying about having good scratch work habits, cultivating those from the beginning, and making sure that you're not missing questions that you do know how to do. There's going to be plenty of questions on an adaptive test that you straight up will not know how to do in the allotted time, and you're going to have to learn to let those go. It's a difficult process for most of us type A folks, but it's totally doable, and it's a good thing for your leadership ability as you progress down this path that you're on right now. It's a good opportunity to cultivate an investor's mindset. How do I get good at investing in the things that are working well? And how do I get good at divesting from the things that are not going to be a good opportunity to pursue? Instead of what's often the individual contributor mindset, which is let me try to do everything perfectly. Okay, it's a big transition, and it's a valuable transition that all of us have made, and you can do it too. Okay, even if you're struggling with that. But I'm just going to hammer this point one more time because it's so important for your success on the quant section. It's so foundational. Just make sure you're getting the questions you do know how to do right, because missing those is going to hurt even more than missing a hard question. And getting hard questions right is awesome, but it's not going to drive your score as much as making sure you always nail the easy and medium questions that you do know. Okay. So coming back to the strategy involved in an adaptive test, or sorry, just extending the strategic conversation, you must answer the question you're on to see the next question. And you can't leave anything blank, like skip it and return to it later. You have to answer the question you're looking at to see the next question. This is just part of the way that the algorithm is able to do what it does, serving you a question based on your performance on the questions you've already seen. Now, something new for the new version of the GMAT, which has never existed before, is you now can, when you get to the end of the section, go back and change your answer on up to 3 problems, which is a pretty cool feature, honestly. And I think it makes it easier to let go of questions that you might be struggling with in the moment. And that was always a very hard thing for people to do on past iterations of the GMAT, because it was just 100% full commitment in the moment, and you could never go back and change anything, and it made it much harder to guess. So this is an interesting new feature that's being piloted with this version of the exam, and I want to talk to you a little bit about how to leverage it. The psychology of this overall can be a big adjustment. And again, this is why I'm hammering this whole adaptive test thing, because it's so different from what you've done in the past, if you're like most of us. And it can be really stressful, and it's very difficult to completely eliminate that stress, in my experience. But you can get much better at handling that stress. And so that's what I want to help you do right now. And the best approach that I've found that I recommend to everybody, especially because this obviously is not a one-on-one conversation where I have tons of context on your personal specific situation. This is a general conversation where I'm giving you advice that's going to basically work for anybody. The best approach is just go through the section once the right way, and don't be planning to go back to any of the questions. So it's kind of like you're still taking it the old way, because the best way to make a decision is make it right the first time. And if you don't know what you're doing on a question, you want to become that person who can just let it go and not have to revisit it like this compulsion to get every single question right, that you're out of control of yourself emotionally. Now, the desire to get every question right, the work ethic required to get every question right, the goal of perfection, I think that's awesome. I have those goals in my life. But I also acknowledge that in certain situations, perfect is going to be the enemy of great. And if I try to make everything perfect, I might destroy all the great things that I could have built. And there's a balance here. And we're all trying to become the kinds of leaders who can recognize what is the situation where we need perfection, and what is the situation where we need to just get something done and then get it out and start iterating with it. And so I want you to have a strategy that's bulletproof from the beginning, that you can then add on all the fancy bells and whistles and tricks and guessing strategies later if you really want that, and that's really appealing to you. But I don't want you going all in on a bunch of tricks that drive a bunch of YouTube views, and then having a crappy foundation for your quant score and having this process take you 3 years instead of 6 months. Okay, that can very easily happen. So let me give a little bit more color and specifics to what I mean by just doing it once the right way. I don't think you should be planning to save time at the end of the section to go back and readjust answers, because within the time pressure of the exam, I've noticed it's very difficult for people to change their perspective on a question once they have formed a perspective on a question. And that's why it's usually best to just do it once the right way. In addition to that, most of us feel that we do not have enough time to answer every question, and that's because they don't give us time to answer every question perfectly. And part of what the exam is measuring is your ability to be a good investor and let go of the things that are bad investments and reallocate those resources to good investments. It's very similar to what a lot of post-MBA roles and responsibilities are like. It's a well-designed test in that regard. So if your strategy revolves around having to go back, that's going to soak up a lot of brain power during the section, and it's going to take away some of the energy that you could be focusing in the moment on the question you're looking at currently, in my experience. Now, it can be done, and if your personal provider who you really trust, who has great results, is recommending that you personally go back and have that strategy to go back to 2 or 3 questions, great, by all means. Again, I'm never going to argue with your results, but just in terms of the general stuff that I've seen work for the most number of people that is basically bulletproof and you can't go wrong, is one great first pass where you invest in what you know and you've cultivated that habit in your practice, and you give away what you don't know and you cultivate the ability to do that. And I'm going to give you some systems and some tools and a mental framework for doing that well in a moment. Okay. So think about it like playing a card game, like poker, or like Go Fish, or I don't know, any card game. You bet more when you have good cards, and you learn to invest more in the hands when you have luck and preparation on your side, and you bet less or you fold when you don't have very good cards. It's a very, very simple mindset that can really help you cultivate the right perspective for this test, which is, if I know what I'm doing on this question and it's going well and I have traction and I'm making progress and I recognize it from something I've seen in my prep, that's a good question to spend more time on. If I'm struggling, if I'm like, wait, I should know how to do this, but it's not clicking and I'm not getting traction and I'm just spinning my wheels, you want to develop the emotional and mental fortitude to be able to let those questions go and recognize that that is a great decision and will net you a better overall score once you understand the way the algorithm works than trying to triple down and be perfect on every single question. This is what I've seen for the vast, vast majority of people. I would say maybe there's 1 out of 1,000,000 test takers who can truly answer every single question in the quant section with enough time. It's extremely, extremely, extremely rare. And if that's you, you have a great advantage. By all means, leverage it. That's like being a talented card player or having a photographic memory as a professional poker player. I'm sure it's a huge advantage. But for most of us, that's not us. And so I recommend that know when to hold them, know when to fold them strategy. All right, reach out to me or us on social channels if you're not sure how to implement that for yourself personally, and we'll do our best to help. Okay, next key point along how the algorithm works and how you want to build a strategy for dealing with the algorithm. It's possible to achieve a great score even when missing a lot of questions. Most people are going to miss about 30% of questions that they see in the quant section. And if you've taken tests up until this point, go back and check some of your previous scores. You'll probably notice that you're missing quite a similar number of questions. Even if your score is sometimes higher, sometimes lower, like the number of questions you're getting right and wrong probably won't track with, okay, more questions right, higher score, fewer questions right, lower score. Sometimes it does. Many times it does not, okay? And again, this is where I'm just going to recommend you check out the video on the site because that's going to teach you what you need to know about that. But I really just want to circle back to this point for a third and final time. The shorter exam, now that there's only 21 questions in quant rather than 31 like there used to be, means there's less margin for error. And that means all the stuff I've been talking to you about today is even more important than it ever has been. The scratch work, more important, because missing one question because of bad scratch work is now 1/20th of my section instead of 1/30th. It's 30% more important, okay? So not missing questions you know how to do, even more important, which is why part of the reason I'm remaking this episode for you to just really put the emphasis on that. I'm sorry if it's annoying. I'm just trying to be as helpful as possible and just make a big deal out of this because most people are not making enough of a big deal out of it when they start their prep. Giving away super hard questions because they're soaking up 6 minutes and making those decisions really well is even more important. So every decision-making tactic, every strategic element is now 30% at minimum more important than it's ever been because there's fewer data points to gauge your ability, and so there's less margin for error. Now, that is a huge reason to triple down on all the advice I've already given you today, but it's also a reason to mentally be planning to take the test 2 to 3 times total. It's very difficult to control the element of luck of the draw in terms of what you're seeing on the test because it's fully randomized. Like you might see 5 strength area questions at the beginning versus 5 weakness area questions at the end. And then you go up and show up and take the test another day and you see 5 strength area questions at the end. So that element of luck is difficult to control except by planning to take the test multiple times. And then you also have the other factors of luck, like rest, your own mental state and performance, what you ate the night before, how you slept. Those are things that are just you can do a lot to control them, but it's difficult to control them perfectly if you're like most human beings. And so just mentally in the back of your mind, plan to take the exam 2 to 3 times if you have to control those elements of luck. But if you can knock it out with 1 rep, that's fantastic. And plenty of people do that. Usually the price for that is just a little bit more preparation on the front end, a few more practice tests, and a little bit more consistent process in terms of how you're spending your study time, and just doubling down on all the stuff that I've shared with you the past few weeks. Okay. Now, the adaptive nature of the test can be frustrating to deal with. It can be confusing, and this is where a lot of people end up pivoting to the GRE. I don't really have a strong preference for you personally. I just want you to take the test that's the best fit for you. But I will say that compared to the GRE, on the GRE, it's a lot harder to get around your weaknesses because it is based purely on accuracy. So that's even less forgiving in terms of missing questions that you know how to do, needing to have incredible scratch work, needing to know every topic super transcendentally well, not being able to get around your weaknesses. Like if you think about the GMAT and what I just described to you, if you just take a leap of faith and trust me that pretty much everybody's going to miss about 20 to 30% of the questions they see, you can realize like that could be a really good asset if you know how to handle it, because maybe you're terrible at probability questions and there's only 2 of them per section, which is only 10% of the section, which means like you don't have to get any probability questions right. You can just kind of fold them when they happen, and you can build a strategy around just deleting your weaknesses, which could save you months of study time of having to learn probability. And I'm not saying you should or shouldn't do that. That's the kind of thing where you want some individual advice around your specific strengths and weaknesses. But that's possible on the GMAT, and it's not possible to the same degree on the GRE. The GRE is going to penalize you a lot heavier for that kind of thing. And so I've seen people be able to get faster, higher results studying for the GMAT than on the GRE. The GRE usually takes longer to study for because you need that level of perfection, and it's very memorization intensive, especially on the verbal side with all the vocabulary that you have to learn. Now, for some people, that is going to be a better fit, but I'm just trying to help you make an informed decision. And I actually have a whole episode on differences between GMAT and GRE that I published a few years back. So you can go listen to that. And I will do my best to update that for you this year at some point. It's not a huge priority on our list right now because the new GMAT's coming out, and that's kind of the bigger issue. But we'll get you an updated GMAT versus GRE episode soon enough. And if you have specific questions about that before we can push that episode out, just hit us up and we'll help you out. So on the GMAT, like even people getting perfect scores sometimes are still missing some questions, which is pretty crazy. Now, that's less common now that we have the shorter version of the test. It used to be a lot more common on the old version of the GMAT where people might miss 5 or 6 questions and still get a perfect score. Now it's a little bit less forgiving, like I was saying. And what I've seen is even if you're missing 1 or 2 questions, that's probably dropping your score down from the perfect score in math, which is 90. But I haven't seen a ton of data points on that yet, so that could shift over time. But as of now, because to most of you, your goal is not to get a perfect GMAT score. Your goal is to get into a killer business school program. I'm not even going to entertain the idea of what it would take to get a perfect score on GMAT Quant because so few of you even have that goal. And it's not even a good goal in terms of being efficient with your time and like getting the ultimate outcome, which is getting a super baller MBA. But if you need a perfect score in quant, then you're going to pay the price to have that transcendental knowledge. And if that's you, much respect. But I don't recommend it. I recommend doubling down on the section that's going to move your overall score as much as possible up until that 675 range, 685 range. And then after that, it's probably not helping you very much unless you're in a super overrepresented category in the applicant pool, such as male investment bankers applying to Wharton. So it's just what I'm saying with overrepresented categories is a lot of male investment bankers apply to Wharton. And so if you're in that category, you might need a slightly higher score than the median to stand out, especially if your GPA isn't super great. But past 705, it might help you with some scholarship money, but even that is like debatable and a little bit of a black box in terms of how those decisions get made. So I would recommend that you go for 655 if you're going for a top 10 school. That's kind of like the new quote unquote 700 level score. And just get your quant to a minimum 78. And then after that, make an assessment either on your own or with your professional advisor about whether it's going to be easier to move the math score more or whether it's going to be easier to move the verbal and the DI up to move the total score up to 685 if you need it, or 705 if you're in a super competitive applicant pool. But if you go back to my episode on how to start, I'll go through some minimum scores for each of the individual sections. I'm not going to rehash that conversation here because this episode's all about quant. So final point about the algorithm here. If you go in with the expectation that you're not going to get every single question right, it helps you make better decisions in terms of time allocation, resource management, and managing the algorithm. And I've seen people get a lot better results with less effort doing it that way, being more strategic about the test instead of just the more is more mentality of a lot of providers. Okay, that's my advice. So, with that being said, summing up these points, there's two main things to avoid. The number one thing is spending too much time on questions you don't know how to do, and rushing through questions you do know how to do, so that you can spend more time on questions you don't know how to do. So let's talk about some systems you can use to practice good habits with this, because that's not going to be very natural for most of us. Most of us are going to have to cultivate the ability to do what I was just saying. So at the biggest level, in terms of managing your overall prep from start to finish, you should be doing more individual questions early on in your prep. So for the first, let's call it 1 to 3 months of preparation where you're covering all the individual topics that you need more work on, you should not be doing sets of questions at all, in my opinion. You should not be doing like 10 geometry in a row or 10 algebra in a row without stopping the timer. You should be doing one question, stop the timer, check your answer, then and only then move to the next question. Then stop the timer, check your answer, move to the next question. And the reason you should be doing that early in your prep is you don't want to be doing something wrong or not correcting a mistake and then compounding doing that wrong thing for the whole rest of the set. And now you're burning in these bad habits even deeper, rather than squashing the bad habit the first time it happens on a problem and then having 8 great reps for the rest of your quote unquote 10 question set. Okay. So individual questions until you've gone through what's called the knowledge building phase and you've at least touched on every single topic once. Once you've touched on every single topic once, then you can move to a timed set style of practice if you want to. And I would just start with simple numbers like 10 questions and start with sets of like 5 easy, 5 medium problems. And you can start with a count up timer. So you create some time awareness, but no time pressure. And then you can, when you're ready, move to a count down timer, like 10 questions in 20 minutes. About 2 minutes a problem is good time pressure to practice with. And then you can build up your difficulty level of questions you're including in the set until you can maintain a solid accuracy of around 70% in each set. Like I said, most people are going to be missing 20 to 30% of questions no matter what they do. And the goal with your time sets is to avoid missing questions you know how to do, cultivate good scratch work habits, and become a better decision maker in terms of letting go of questions that are bad investments. Okay. And that's how you can scale those habits in your prep. That's my advice there. If you have questions about that, let me know. Here's a framework that you can use irrespective of which phase of prep that you're in. If you're in the single question phase and you want to be working on good time management habits, the framework I'm about to talk you through is going to help you. If you're in the sets of questions phase or in the time management on full length exam phase of your prep, then what I'm about to talk to you about now is going to really, really help you out also. And this was a huge hit from our original Quant episode that we published about 5 years ago. So I'm going to reiterate it for you here and just update it for the new exam. So I call this the 1, 2, 3 rule of time management. And I'm going to use a couple analogies to help you understand this. So what is the 1, 2, 3 rule? At the basic level, you're going to assess how a problem is going after 1 minute, and then you're going to assess how it's going after 2 minutes, and then you're going to assess how it's going after 3 minutes. That's the 1, 2, 3 rule. And you're going to make different decisions depending on how the problem is going at 1 minute, 2 minutes, or 3 minutes into solving the problem. Okay. So what are you working on in the first minute of the problem? That's just the get to know you phase. And if you think about having a relationship with this problem, then you could think about this like a first date or like a first contact with the person or a first interview if it's like hiring for a job. And you're just trying to sort out, are there any massive red flags or deal breakers on this question? That's what you're trying to figure out in the first minute. Just, is there anything that is a definite no that would keep me from proceeding on this problem, such as I can't understand what the question is asking me? Well, that's a huge red flag. Now, anytime I invest on the question is a huge waste of time. Probably not going to get it right if I can't understand what it's asking me. Second, just as important, can't understand what it's giving me. I don't understand the parameters of this question. That's a huge red flag. If you're noticing that within the first minute, it's time to pick your favorite letter, pick the same letter every single time. Don't think about strategic guessing when you're doing this kind of thing. Just cut time, because you don't want to be strategically guessing, choosing to invest time on a question where it's probably not going to pay off. That's a bad investment. Okay, I don't recommend that. But within that first minute, you should be collecting data on the problem, like writing down what the problem's asking you, writing down everything that you're given. Again, good scratch work habits, and making sure that there's a reasonable odds of success on the problem. And if there isn't, you cut your losses within that first minute. Okay. So it's just like going on a first date and the person's like, yeah, I screw up all my relationships. I've cheated on every partner I've ever been with, and I'm a huge liar and you can't trust me. Okay, thanks for letting me know. I'm out of here. Bye. Not going to have a relationship with someone dishonest. That's a deal breaker for me personally. Some of you might have different standards. Whereas if I'm on a first date and someone's just like, oh, I'm working on my communication skills. It hasn't been like the best thing for me in the past, but I've shown, a lot of improvement, and, I could really appreciate your help as, if you're into me and you want to progress, that's like, I would potentially entertain that. It's a little bit of like a yellow flag, like, oh, okay, we'll see how that goes. But I'm not going to just stop seeing the person because they're working on themselves and they're not perfect already. Like that would be kind of absurd in my book. Some of you might have different standards. I don't know. It's just an example. This is not a class on dating, but it's just an example of stuff that might come up in a problem where you don't have to have a perfect first minute on the problem to continue to invest. You're just trying to assess, is it a bad investment? Okay. And then you hit the 2 minute range. And if after that first minute, you feel like it's a good investment, you're going to put your head down and you keep working on the problem for another minute. And within that 1 to 2 minute range, you just want to assess, am I making traction? Are all the assumptions I had in the first minute playing out? Do I actually know how to do it? Is the strategy that I'm implementing going well? And if it is, then you take as long as you need to do that strategy well. Again, don't miss questions you know how to do. Execute well, good scratch work all the way to the finish. And then at 2 minutes, you make the exact same assessment. Is another minute investment here likely to pay off or not? Now, at the 2 minute mark, it's a little bit of a bigger investment because now you're choosing to borrow time from a future problem that you haven't seen yet in order to invest it in the current problem. And that might be a good investment if the current problem is going well. I would rather invest in something that's a sure bet that's probably going to go well than gamble on an unseen situation that I have no data on. That's a less, there's more risk involved in the no data question. Whereas if the question is not going particularly well, it's less risky to save that time for a future question that I haven't seen yet that I might understand better. Okay. So that's the basics of the 1, 2, 3 rule. I'm just deciding after 1 minute, is this a good investment? Deciding after 2 minutes, is this a good investment? And then if I make it up to 3 minutes, I'm bailing out on the question 100% of the time, no matter what's going on. Because if I get into that 3 to 4 minute range, then that's 1 point for the price of two. And that's an investment that is just basically never going to pay off across a GMAT section. Okay. So let's dive deeper into the first minute. If I don't have a strategy, and I'm not getting any traction and I'm not thinking I know how to do it, I'm out of there. If I do have a strategy, I'm going to give myself the opportunity to strategize and let that play out. In the second minute, it's kind of like the second date. So you just want to make sure that, okay, there's some potential here. So I want to do a good job and not mess up the relationship with some controllable things like bad scratch work or rushing through the problem or trying to get the problem done so I can get to the next question. I want to be doing a good job selling this problem on the fact that I'm a good candidate, right? Like if you make it to that second interview, now the company is going to be like, hey, you have potential as a candidate. They're going to try to sell you on the role a little bit because there's potential there, and vice versa. Okay. So you just want to make sure you're executing well in that second minute if you choose to go that route. And then if it's the way to know if it's going to pay off or if you need to bail out is there more or less than a 50% likelihood of this paying off? Okay, that's how I make my decisions there. If it's less than 50%, stop and let it go. If it's more than 50%, you can go all the way up to 3 minutes. Okay. And if you want a little bit more detailed explanation of the 1, 2, 3 rule, I go into a little bit more depth in the past episode, but that's the basics. I think that I've covered those sufficiently here. And if you do a good job of this on a consistent basis in practice and on the exam, you should have great per question timing. You should make great timing decisions, and you should have good overall set timing, which is critical for your success on GMAT Quant. Okay. So there's a good little tool you can use to develop the 1, 2, 3 rule if you're struggling with it, which is called an interval timer. And you can just go to online stopwatch, online-stopwatch.com, and click on their interval timer, or you can Google it. And you can just set up a timer where there's a sound at 1 minute, a sound at 2 minutes, and a sound at 3 minutes. And that's a great tool you can use to develop this background intuitive sense of what 1 minute feels like, what 2 minutes feels like, and what 3 minutes feels like. So you can start making great decisions. And all of you are super intelligent, good iterators, great problem solvers, or you wouldn't even be considering an MBA in the first place. And so I trust your judgment in terms of developing that skill set over time based on the data you collect on yourself there. As long as you execute on individual problems when you're in your knowledge building phase and sets of problems when you exit the knowledge building phase, you should be good to go with timing there. But as always, if you have questions, just reach out and we'll do our best to help you. Couple final thoughts. A lot of people ask me, should I check the clock after every question in this section? No, don't do that. You're going to end up obsessing about the timer and just freaking yourself out and wasting a bunch of time. Super simple way to track your timing in each section is check your clock every 7 questions in quant and DI, and it should be 7 questions every 15 minutes in both of those sections. And then in verbal, it's 23 questions in 45 minutes, so you should check the clock every 8 questions. Okay, so 15 minutes for every 7 questions in quant and DI, 15 minutes for every 8 questions in verbal. And that's a great, super simple way to make sure you're on pace and that you're checking the clock enough, but you're not checking the clock too much. Okay, that's what I recommend. Other final thoughts. If you're missing a lot of questions you know how to do, make sure that you start with quality scratch work or go back to auditing your scratch work. And a good benchmark is your scratch work should be so clear that someone could tell exactly how you thought through the problem without having to talk to you. They could just look at your scratch work and see the mental logic that you went through. Okay. And if your scratch work's not that clear, then it's not good enough yet. And if you need to develop this, don't use time pressure. Stop the time pressure. Just run a count up timer on your questions, and don't use the interval timer. Don't use the 1, 2, 3 rule. Just let the timer run for 15 minutes if you need to until you get that great scratch work. Work on that perfect scratch work on enough questions that you just naturally start to get faster. Okay, so that's where a little bit of volume can really help. I do that with my students all the time. Works great. If you are struggling with content and the book explanations, the explanations in the official guide, then a web search can really help with that. So just parting tip there, popping questions into a web search can really help with alternate explanations on the quant side. And that's a big pain point. Scratchwork's a big pain point for people. Bad explanations in the official guide are a big pain point for people when they're studying GMAT quant. So just kind of wrapping up with some quick hitter tips at the end of the episode. As always, if you have questions, just reach out anytime, like I've said so many times. And my greatest hope, as always, is that this material will make your studies as easy and as painless as they can possibly be. If you want more tips and strategies for optimizing your performance on the GMAT, head to our website, thegmatstrategy.com, and check out our free 40-minute video presentation on how to achieve your dream GMAT score in half the normal time. That'll include all the algorithm and instruction I mentioned earlier in the episode and much, much more that will help you. It's totally free. And it's just our gift to you to try to help you out as much as we possibly can. In the meantime, this is a weekly show, so please subscribe and stay positive and stay consistent with your studies. I'll talk to you all soon.